uphold the rights of Palestinians. My integration is questioned, is brought into question. But a serial killer or a serial rapist who happen to be called John, Kevin, or Trevor will never have his integration or his Britishness ever brought into question. He could be spending his entire life in prison, but no one is ever, they'll all say he's evil, but no one is ever going to answer or question his Britishness or his integration. But because myself, I've never broken the law in my life, as far as I can recall, I've never done anything wrong, I've never been hauled and accused of anything, but because I have a political view, I have an opinion on a certain matter, all of a sudden, the whole concept of my belonging or otherwise is brought into question. This is the very essence of a society that has gone wrong. And this is a society that allows for the rise of populist politics and the rise of people like Trump. That is the reality. And therefore, my brothers and sisters, just to end with this, when we talk about Islamophobia, actually we're not talking about a problem that Muslims suffer from. We are talking about a problem that society is encountering. And the potential, the next step for when Islamophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, all sorts of discriminatory trends, when they take hold in society, the next step is that society becomes divided. And we allow for people like Trump, the British version, to come up with populist politics in which complex issues are answered and resolved with simple, clear, unambiguous answers, but answers that create the premise for a xenophobic, divided, hate-filled society that can never, ever grow or develop. Thank you very much.
I'd like to say Jazakallah. Thank you very much for that talk, which was very insightful. We'll now have time for Q&A.
Yep.
So, do you want to?
Yes.
We'll open the floor to questions, and I think there should also be paper if people would rather write.
If anyone wants to write on a piece of paper, then that's absolutely fine. I have a brother over there. Is there anyone else? I'd rather take two, 3 questions. Yes. Yes, Andy. So we have 3 questions. So shall I start with the gentleman? Alaykum as-salam.
The onus of Islamophobia.
Can you just say your name?
Hanzala.
Yes.
The onus of Islamophobia and taking action against Islamophobia should be on the Muslim community, as you said. And the attitude and manner of thinking that you're encouraging us as Muslims to adopt, I believe is correct. One of rejecting guilt and remaining steadfast in our beliefs. But since we're only in control of our own actions, then we have to assume responsibility for initiating change, because if we don't, no one else will. How are we meant to push that change and initiate that change and push the country to address the issue of Islamophobia?
Thank you. Yes.
My question was...
Your name, please?
Oh, Lina, sorry. You said that traditional media like CNN or CNBC or so on were not having the right understanding of how Trump was addressing his voters. Do you think that media like talk show, for example, Trevor Noah was encouraging Muslim journalists to speak or so on, or John Oliver have a better understanding of Trump's politics and how he's speaking to people?
Mm. Interesting. Yes.
Rabia. So you said to divide the appeasement of immigration. Do you think doing that would cause a rise in Islamophobia, and if so, how are we supposed to combat that?
You mean countering the notion of integration, whether that will cause the rise in Islamophobia? Okay. So let me address those quite quickly. I mean, they're quite interesting. Yeah, I'll come back to you finally. I mean, they're quite interesting questions, and they can open up avenues of further debate. There seems to be a very simple answer, to be honest, but it's probably far more complex in terms of implementation. We need to do a number of things. Firstly, go on about our lives according to our own values. Okay? I mean, I as a Muslim, I live my life according to a code. And that code is both value-driven as well as ritual-driven. Okay? And I should carry on that regardless. That's one thing. Because if we as Muslims behave as Muslims should, not only on a behavioral manner, but also on an intellectual basis, most of the problems out there will be addressed. I wouldn't say they go away, but they will be addressed. That's one thing. The other thing is, we need to be more visible. And this is, by the way, this counters some of the arguments made by leaders of the Muslim community in the past. I recall when 9/11 happened, okay, in 2001. And I recall almost immediately after that, there was a meeting of leaders of the Muslim community, Muslim organizations. And I remember one of the elders who stood and said, listen, guys, this is the end of time. We need to go to our homes, lock our doors, tell our daughters and sisters and wives and such not to bother about going to work or to university, not to go out as much as possible. We should stack up on food, you know, milk and stuff. And I was listening and I was thinking to myself, oh dear Allah, what this is frightful. This is absolutely frightful. The answer to being attacked is not to be less visible, but to be more visible. And this, yes, of course, it will come at a cost. And some might get hurt as a result, unfortunately. But collectively, on the long run, retreating is not the answer. Is not the answer. Never let go of the gains that the community has made. The Muslim community has made strides, has contributed towards Britain and towards British society in a way that unfortunately is largely undocumented. But we haven't just arrived. I mean, this is what sometimes gets me when I have a discussion with people whom I assume are intelligent. I say, listen, all of a sudden now you're saying, well, hang on. There is this verse in the Holy Quran in chapter so and so. They know the numbers, by the way. They've never read the Quran, but they know the numbers. They know the chapter, they know the verse, and they know the word, the buzzword. Jihad, it says jihad. It says, oh, all of a sudden everyone's scared, you know, ducking under their desks. But Muslims have been reading the Quran for 1,400 years. The very same Quran. We haven't just arrived in Britain. Several years ago, I can't remember now, I think it was 2006 or 7, more than 10 years ago, I was invited to go and attend the 100th anniversary of the first mosque in Sutton. 100 years, that mosque in Sutton. And this was 12, 13 years ago. The East London Mosque, one of the largest establishments throughout Europe. The East London Mosque has an archive. And those of you who visit London and manage to have an afternoon, please do go and visit. It has an archive. And that archive shows the minutes of the East London Mosque, which is now a huge complex, but started off as a very small hut where 12 people, 15 people at most would pray. Okay? And they have the minutes of their meetings. Still, they've preserved it. And it goes back to 1910, 118 years ago. Why weren't those Muslims from 100 years ago, 80 years ago, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago, why weren't they accused of being terrorists? They read the same Quran, they prayed in the same way, they did the same things. They lived the same lives more or less. So what's happened in the past 15, 18 years that all of a sudden deemed everyone needs to be afraid of a Muslim? It's ridiculous. It belies any kind of rationale or logic. So I would say that we need to be more visible and we need to be more active. And you know what? The first point I said we need to live our lives as Muslims, part of that is standing up for justice, standing up for fairness, standing up for the vulnerable, for the weak, for those who don't have a voice, who don't have the capacity to stand up for themselves. Let me say, and being self-critical, we do that very well, or we do that well, I'll take out the very. We do that well when it comes to Muslim issues. But we don't do it well at all when it comes to other people who are downtrodden, who are subjugated, who are terrorized, who are victimized, who are enslaved. We don't do the same. So we need to live by our Islam. This is not an issue of politics. It's an issue of Islam, me being a Muslim. And behaving like the Prophet ﷺ when he stood by the oppressed regardless of whether they were Muslims or otherwise. He stood with the oppressed even when the oppressed at some stage were his own arch enemies and wanted his own demise. So that, for instance, would go a long way. And this, I'm not trying to appease anyone, by the way. I'm not trying to prove Tommy Robinson wrong. No, I'm just trying to live by my Islam, my faith. So I always tell my British friends who are sometimes concerned about, oh, well, this Muslim citizens, that I'm not entirely sure that they are doing their bit, or they're not. I say the best of British citizens are the best of Muslims. The better a Muslim is at being a Muslim, the better they will be at being a British citizen. They'll be truthful, they'll be honest, they'll be transparent, they'll be equal, they'll be fair, they'll be just, they'll be clean and hygienic, they'll help others, they'll support others. That's what Islam is. So part of it, and I am not here to self-flagellate, I'm not here as a self-hater at all, but I'm saying that part of the solution is in our grasp. Now, you asked the question about whether there is a part of the media that is doing something which is unconventional, but probably giving a better insight into what reality is, and that is through humor, parody, satire, political satire. I agree. I think that has an incredible role in the whole public discussion. So you'll find that people learn far more from The Daily Show, for instance, or from John Oliver, or from whoever, than they do from political analysts or commentators and the like. And yes, because comedy is allowed to go to areas and to address certain issues from perspectives that a news report can't. So they have that kind of luxury, but still, I feel, I'll tell you what, I mean, this is an early prediction, that unless, bar a total political earthquake, such as the impeachment of Donald Trump, barring that, I think that Donald Trump has the greatest chance of winning the elections in 2022. I sincerely, 2020. I sincerely think that. Because the left in America has failed. With all due respect, Hillary Clinton was never a good candidate. I mean, her card was that she was going to be the first female president, but that's not good enough. That's not good enough, and it proved not to be good enough. Because someone who was a misogynist, white, capitalist, proved to be a far more popular choice. Yeah, I know that the popular vote was won by Hillary Clinton, but regardless, according to the laws of the election, Trump won. And I think that since then, the left haven't managed to gather themselves. They haven't managed to come up with real solutions. Their strongest argument, the Democrats, their strongest argument is that Trump is a bad person. That's the strongest argument, but that's not an argument that will solve people's problems, their health, their transportation, their trade, security and such. It won't solve their problems, and therefore it's a very weak and pathetic argument in a way. And also there's a lot of infighting. There's still, you know, the hard left like Bernie Sanders and such, and then there's the establishment left, and this whole discussion. But I still think that if Trump runs, he's going to win. Unless something, as I said, something incredible happens. But unfortunately, that's the situation. So even with the likes of Trevor Noah, so what you have is the 49.5% of Americans, they are more aware, but that hasn't won over any chunk of the other 50.5%, unfortunately. And Rabia, regarding integration, I think we need to argue for it. First of all, we need to believe in it. I mean, what I just said, does it make sense? If it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't make sense. That's fine. Carry on. Try to achieve that elusive goal of being integrated. I don't know what it is. I really don't. I honestly don't. I have no idea. If anyone here cares to tell me precisely what being integrated in British society means, please let me know, because I'd love to carry around that manual and tick the boxes and see whether I'm there or not. I don't know how it is. I don't know how it happens. I don't know how it's all of a sudden taken away. I don't know. I really don't know. I thought that being law-abiding, decent, civil, you know, going on about life as decently and honourable as possible, I thought that was sufficient. But apparently, no. There's something else. It's, you know, my views need to be agreeable with I don't know who, you know, someone. I don't know. But I would suggest that if we believe that the whole argument is false, we need to start talking about it. And we need to start debating it. And we need to start writing about it. And we need to start educating about it. And by the way, today I'm talking about Islamophobia. But that goes the same. It goes with the Hindu community. It goes with the Afro-Caribbean community. It goes with the African community. It goes with the Balkans community. Everyone who has come and settled in this country and made it richer. This whole thing about immigration, by the way. Okay, fine. I mean, it's an issue, but to be made in the existential threat that we hear about in the debates, that is just bad. That is just not right by any standards. Not just because I personally think so, because the numbers, the figures, trade, industry, manufacturing, they all defy that whole premise. Immigration was always part of Western societies. By the way, I mean, we think that immigrants, I mean, they're the only beneficiaries out of this deal when they arrive in a new country. First of all, I'll tell you about my own country. I come from Iraq. And at some stage, Iraq had amongst the highest numbers of immigrants, whether they be the Arabs or the Kurds, to the UK and Western Europe, for a number of reasons. During the 80s, because they were dissidents and against the Ba'athist regime. My father, for instance, when he arrived in the UK, I was 2 years old, he arrived because he fled the Ba'athist regime. And then we had the Iran-Iraq war, and then we had the 90s with the embargo, the economic sanctions, and then we had the 2003 invasion and occupation of Iraq. So there were many, many reasons why Iraqis arrived. But I can assure you of this, that out of all the tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of Iraqis that came as immigrants, I would say more than 90% would have much rather stayed in their own country, in their own homes, amongst their own families, living safely, securely, decently, with the minimum level of decency, you know, decent living. They would have loved that. Why come to Britain? I mean, look at the weather, for God's sake. I mean, why live as strangers in very tiny houses with, you know, and encounter the issue of learning a new language and a new culture and such and try to, why do that? So part of the problem is because Western policies, they created the conditions for people to want to migrate. I mean, the other day I was at a function where we were addressing the issue of Syrian refugees. I'm sorry, I'm going to finish. And you know, people were talking about, well, you know, the Syrians are coming to this new life and you know, these new opportunities, and they were talking about as though somehow, you know, southern Italian towns were heaven on earth, or that you know, Sweden in December is just the place to be. It's ridiculous. And I argued. I said, listen, a mother who voluntarily puts her children in a boat that is more likely to sink than it is to stay afloat is someone who knows that even with that threat, the sea is far safer than the land that she's leaving behind. No one does that because we're going to Disneyland. We're going to this new, you know, land of honey, and that's ridiculous. When people risk their own lives and the lives of their own children, who might, by the way, survive even without their parents. We have countless children who arrive, but their parents drown. Anyone who would risk that, you must ask why. What drives them to do this? What drives them to, you know, to walk for hundreds of miles, to risk being turned away, to be gassed, to be shot at, and then to live a life whereby you're accused every single day of stealing people's jobs, of taking over their homes, of ruining the country's economy. Who would want that? But it's because of the conditions that the West, and including our own country, Britain, created, that drove people out of their own homes. That's one thing. But also, we have to accept that this is an economic transaction. When you have countries like Germany, like Austria, where the growth rate, the population growth rate, becomes in the minus, meaning that the societies are declining, they're dying out. And this, by the way, it's not just the fact that societies are shrinking in numbers. There is a more economic, very crass economic reality to all this. And that is that when you have, in the case of Germany, for instance, in 2008, when the population, the growth was minus 0.4%, and it was declining even further, that means that within a matter of 20 years, no more, you will have far more pensioners than you will have laborers, people who pay taxes in order to provide for the pensioners. It's an economic reality. So those immigrants, they are also a savior to these societies and their futures. The same idiots who follow people like Tommy Robinson and protest the arrivals of immigrants, they themselves will be getting their pensions off the taxes and wages of those immigrants who have just arrived and they're protesting their arrival. So this is a transaction at the end of the day. So it's not that these countries, out of the kindness of their heart, they're just receiving us and their guests and it's not that at all. This is for the benefit of our society. And immigration is one of the pillars of development and growth of any society. And also the contribution of Muslims, but also all sorts of minorities who came from all around the world. You know, the empire, for God's sake. I mean, we were colonized by Britain. They thought that they could go and colonize the subcontinent and colonize Arabia and then just leave without paying for those 200 years. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Okay, do we have time to take another round of questions? Maybe another couple of questions, because the gentleman here wanted to ask a question. So here, let me see if there's someone else, okay, so you'll have the final question then. Yes?
Yes, I would like to ask you if you think that the re-education camps in Xinjiang, do you think that is also a form of Islamophobia?
Sorry, the re-education camps in?
In Xinjiang.
Yes.
Uyghur.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. Yes, yeah, Osama.
Jazakallah khair.
Sorry, I didn't get your name.
How?
How?
Jazakallah khair for your talk. To be honest, I had about 3 questions, but I'm just going to cut it down to 1 question to keep it simple. Yeah, my question is, basically, there were different forms of capitalism as a political ideology that we've seen. So back in the colonization era, there was capitalism in the form of colonizing countries. Then there was the other form, which was more leftist liberal form, which we've seen in the past 50 years. But now we're kind of moving more towards the populist era of capitalism. And we've seen that throughout all of these eras, there's been racism, there's been hate against certain groups, for example, Muslims, Jews, blacks, Irish people. So, I mean, do you think that capitalism as a political ideology has failed us in bringing society together and bringing harmony within different cultures and different religions?
Thank you. Yes, yeah. Oh, sorry. Did you want to ask a question? So, okay. So, yes, you, and then.
My name is Abdullah. So the question is, you touched upon your fear of how Muslims react to Islamophobia. One of the manifestations of Islamophobia today is that particularly Muslim students are intimidated, or they have pressure put upon them on what kind of topics they can discuss on campus, who they can invite, speakers that I'm sure you know, people like Azam Tamimi, Dawood Abdullah, Muazzam Bey, possibly even yourself. I'd like to hear about whether you experienced this yourself. What would you say to them, to the Muslim students? How should we be reacting to this pressure, this official pressure?
Hamzallah?
Yes.
During the recent event that took place in Huddersfield at the school with the young Syrian
Yes.
lad who had his arm broken and then was chokeslammed and whatnot, how do you think as a national community, as Muslims, we should react to that immediately? What should be our immediate response?
Okay. Thank you. I'll try to answer. Firstly, the re-education camps. They sound so lovely, don't they? I mean, if there was a subscription, I probably would. Re-education camps. I mean, how lovely is that? It's vile. It's vile. I mean, we have all heard about the concentration camps in Auschwitz, and where we know of various cultural cleansing efforts carried out by various fascist regimes throughout modern times as well as before that. And it just belies logic that in 2018, in the 21st century, when humanity has reached probably the pinnacle of technology, of advancement, of development, and also claiming humanity, democracy, equality, fairness, human rights, that we have what we have in Jingo. I mean, the numbers are reportedly over 1 million. I have met people who have fled that and have left their families behind. I've met with a number of them recently, 6-7 months ago in Turkey, and the things that they mention, the stories that they tell are horrific, absolutely horrific. The beatings that they receive simply because they are found to be carrying a copy of the Quran, or carrying out fasting in Ramadan. So last Ramadan, thousands were rounded up because they didn't eat during the day, and therefore they were seen as being people who subscribe to Islam. Basically, and according to even official statements, only yesterday I was reading that Islam was being treated as though it was a mental illness. Imagine if we were to say the same of Hinduism, Judaism. We might as well. What's to stop us? It could happen. It's happened in the past for the blacks, for the Jews, for the Irish. It could happen, and now it's happening for Muslims, and it could happen next time round for another people, another minority. It's really, really problematic. My organization, as well as many others, are extremely concerned. We are about to write to the Chinese embassy, as well as to the British government, in order to have it put pressure, exercise pressure on the Chinese government to address this issue. The problem is that, unfortunately, today, everything is driven by economic interests and trade. You see that in the case of Trump with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Despite Trump himself admitting at some stage that the Crown Prince might have killed or ordered the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, but because of the interests. He himself said, it would be silly of us to renege on deals that will bring us hundreds of thousands of jobs, and then the Russians will seize control and take the opportunity and such. So basically it means that it doesn't matter about human life or about human rights. What matters is the size of the contract. And that's despicable. And the same goes for China, unfortunately. China has managed over the past 2 decades particularly to cement itself as an indisposable partner. And therefore, whatever it does, unfortunately, it manages to do without anyone interfering, simply because it's too big of a trade partner to upset. And that is a big problem. But it's down to each and every one of us to demand that our government exercises human rights, that it puts human rights beyond, above economic interests. So that's with that. Now,
you think that it's definitely a form of Islamophobia too?
It goes beyond Islamophobia. It's well, if you wish to call it religious genocide. It's far more than, it's ethnic cleansing on a cultural and faith-based or faith driven ethnic cleansing. Regarding capitalism, Osama, yes, I agree. To be honest, the models of how society should be modeled and how they should be run invariably achieved good and also failed on quite important levels, both in terms of the achievements and in terms of the failures. The problem is, and this is something which I'm not an expert, but I think I'm well read. I think I've entered into these discussions. I stood for elections myself several years ago, so I have a little bit of background that allows me to be part of the discussion. There are some good things in capitalism and good things in socialism, and I don't think it's either or. And this total division, this polarization between right and left, is ridiculous. Socialism is not the answer, and you can only look at the Soviet Union and other socialist states that failed on every single level and then collapsed. And at the same time, capitalism provides a very immoral model whereby humans are mere fodder for the capital creating machine. And neither provides solutions. And even when Trump says that the American economy is doing far better on them, he might be right in terms of figures. But you have to look on reality on the ground. People are more afraid. People are more isolated. They are more divided. So what's the benefit of having more in your bank account when you're more afraid? Or you feel that your children are less secure? So in a sense, this is a discussion that we need to have, and we need to open up and also offer our perspective as Muslims, an Islamic perspective on this. And we do have a perspective. Why is it that we're not part of the discussion? Are we not part of societies? Don't we have an interest in, how our economies run, how our factories and industries and such are run? We do, but unfortunately it seems that we have accepted to be put in a particular box, that we only are addressed by the media when there is a terrorist attack, when there is an issue with a hijabi sister, when there is an issue about Islamic so and so and so. But it's as though we're not doctors, engineers, politicians, lawyers, philosophers. It seems that we have no interest in life apart from, talking about terrorism, talking about So this is part of a bigger discussion that I think we need to have. Abdullah, your question was, yes, the issue you discussed is quite apt because I know. And yes, you're absolutely right. You mentioned certain names, and yes, I'm also part of, whenever I'm, especially in London, I mean Sheffield might be a little bit out of the way, I think, but when in London when I'm invited, there's always a demonstration by some. It's not a huge demonstration, I'm not worth that big a demonstration, but there's always some sort of protest against me coming and talking to people because I'm, labeled as this and that. And yes, we do have a problem with free speech. I mean, if there are places where you should promote, not just allow, you should promote and encourage people to actually say what they think, even if it sounds ridiculous, it is here in university campuses. Because once you graduate, you'll enter into life and then you'll sort of adopt a particular position. This is the time to think freely, to express yourself, to express your ideas, never to be intimidated by anyone or anything. This is the time when you're all mentally and emotionally growing and becoming better and stronger people. You are going to be the leaders of tomorrow's society, industry, trade, economy, politics, law, justice. So if you don't think now and collect all these ideas and listen to everyone and agree with whoever you want to agree and disagree with whoever you want to disagree with, unless you do that, then how will you be shaped? If ultimately you're told to toe a line and that's it, you won't be able to produce, you won't be able to push and promote society forward. And yes, unfortunately, some have managed to make campuses places where people are intimidated and fearful. I know of students, they've come to me and they've said, students, second year, third year students, who've come to me and said, we were told that if we are involved in holding this debate on Palestine or such, then we might not graduate, we might get expelled, we might get punished, and it definitely will go on our record and we won't find jobs afterwards. Imagine that kind of threat to people who are working hard in order to make something of themselves. And they believe in something, even if they're wrong. You know what? And by the way, I'm against shutting down debate for anyone. I'm against shutting down debate even for Zionists whom I'm against. I'd rather they have their debate and we have ours, and then people get to decide, which is more convincing, which makes more sense. I'd rather we have that. I don't want, it would be hypocritical of us to say, well, you should allow me to say whatever I want, but you're not going to be allowed to say what you want. That doesn't work. That does not work. So yes, it's quite shameful, and to be honest, I mean, we still have it okay here in the UK. If you go to America, America is a really sad scene. In many universities which used to thrive on open debate and discussion of all ideas and such, and now people can almost never express themselves. On many campuses which used to be hives of free speech and discussions and such. And finally, Hazala, you mentioned the issue, this despicable story. And 2 days in succession, firstly the boy and now his sister. I don't know whether you've heard about this or seen this clip about. It's painful. I have to admit, I couldn't watch it. I heard about it, I just couldn't watch it because, someone who's gone through so much and then to be treated in this particular way, a boy of 16 years old, 15 years old, and now his sister. I mean, what? Imagine, I'm just thinking like their parents. Imagine what their parents are going through. It's despicable. And this boy, when he gets waterboarded, you wonder, this 16-year-old, where did he learn this? Who taught him this? Who taught him this? You talk about, we hear about Muslims being radicalized. This boy was radicalized. He was taught torture schemes and torture methods that, a 16-year-old shouldn't know about. I think that the public reaction was excellent. The fact that we have now, alhamdulillah, social media, which made the story public. I heard about it quite early on. and the advice was put it on Facebook, put it on our social media networks, and within a matter of less than 2 hours, literally less than 2 hours, it was on the news. And that is proper. That is how it should be. And the boy, the 16-year-old boy, has been taken. Now, I'd like also to mention and put on record that I also read that the boy has been targeted by a group of vigilantes, and his family have been forced out of their house. I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong. I insist that that we uphold righteousness, that we uphold morality. And by the way, the most difficult time to uphold your values and your ethics and your morals is with those who have attacked you, those who have aggressed against you. That is the most difficult part. You could be, truthful and decent and with someone whom you meet on the street, but try doing the same with someone who did you so much harm, who acted so despicably in the past. Try doing that. That's the difficult bit, but we must. And listen, we don't know yet about the facts of the case, and it's being investigated. But the boy did something which was bad, and he should be punished for it, and he should learn a lesson. But we don't know that his parents were culpable, were part of it, and therefore why should they fear for their safety? What about the boy's siblings, for instance, younger, older? So I think the response has been swift. The response has been very good. Today, the story of the sister now is across the media. Everyone is now covering this, and people are extremely, determined to help. And the funds that were raised till now reaching more than £100,000. I think it's not about money. It's more about how you can now rectify the psychological damage done to this boy and girl, so that they themselves, when they grow up as stable, reasonable, diligent, humane people who don't seek retribution or to avenge the wrongs that were done to them. That's now going to be of incredible concern. So anyway, I hope that I've answered this. I thank you for listening attentively, and I thank once again the Islamic Circle here at the University of Sheffield for inviting me, and for all of you for coming here tonight. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
I'd like to thank you once again for an excellent speech and excellent talk. I know that I've definitely learned a lot. I hope everyone else has benefited too. So just not to keep you all too long, but just to go through some of U6 announcements coming up. Here we go. So there's paintballing, which is on Sunday the 2nd of December. We also have a career workshop, which here it says Sunday the 3rd of December, but it will be the 2nd because that's a Sunday. Do come along if you're interested. With the Malaysian Society on the 1st of December, so sorry, kind of put down, but Saturday 1st of December, football and dodgeball tournament. This talk actually is in Bradford with Islamic Institute of Islamic Learning. And it is ticketed, but there'll be a student discount. Just let us know if you're interested in that. Also, I'll highlight here that as part of this collaboration, we have Amar Al-Shukri coming to deliver a talk called Sincerely Yours, Ikhlas, which is sincerity and making Allah of God your audience. That will be on Thursday next week, so in a week's time, in the Arts Tower, inshallah. So make sure you come along for that. Then Wednesday next week we have our regular Quran classes, which are open for anyone of any level. Muslim Welfare House every Sunday have Arabic for understanding of Quran, and it says here £50 per 10 sessions, but actually now there's a student discount, so it's £40 per 10 sessions. U6 phone, here's the phone number, and you can use it to contact us anonymously, feedback and Q&A. you can still join a USIC subcommittee if you'd like to get involved in USIC, please do. And membership cards are still available. Just ask a committee member if you don't yet have one and would like one. And keep up to date with USIC on social media. And that's it. Thanks everyone for coming.